Robert Louis Stevenson is considered one of the greatest Victorian writers. His fame is chiefly connected to the novel The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. At the center of this literary work there is the contrast between ethics and science. What is right for science is not exactly right for ethics. There is the contrast between what is good and what is right. In the Victorian age there was a clear border between what is right and what is wrong. That's why at the end the villain is always punished. Thus there appears a reflection upon the sense of justice. Other problems emerge as the danger of drug addiction. The protagonist is not able to control the effects of his potion. There is a theme of the overreacher who wants to go beyond his limits because he does not recognize where they are. There is a theme of the double who is inside ourselves, the mask we have to wear in society to stand social conventions, the fear of facing boredom and anxiety. Lewis Carroll was a mathematician before being a writer. His fame is tied to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, a book for children but giving rise to multiple readings and interpretations. It's marked by the contrast between the world of adults and that of kids looking for sense out of nonsense, the strict role of logics behind bizarre characters set in fantastic contexts. There emerges the difficulty of growing up as well as a critical attitude towards education seen as mechanic, far from real life. As far as this style is concerned, it's a fantasy novel with an unconventional use of words. Illustrations assume a strategic role to attract the reader as well as lullabies and some rhymes. There's an external narrator who occasionally appears in opposition to an internal one with a limited perspective of the whole story. Dialogues are not missing. Oscar Wilde is certainly one of the greatest English writers, chiefly connected to aestheticism. The cult of beauty was at the center of his literary works. He stated that a work of art has to be valued as it is without any moral message. The artist has a mission, that is revealing beauty. He was a poet, an essayist, a playwright and a novelist. His fame is related to the picture of Dorian Gray with the appeal to the double represented by the portrait. He plays on the idea that good-looking people are moral as well, mocking Victorian respectability. Despite of this, he remains a Victorian because at the end, the villain is punished and there is not any form of redemption. As far as this style is concerned, he employs dialogues, dramatic effects, a subtle humor, and an unobtrusive narrator, and appeal to all senses to create a sensual atmosphere. Emily Dickinson is one of the greatest American poetic voices. Even though she lived an almost secluded life, she was able to give rise to a large range of themes as loneliness, her relation to God, the difficulty of living, a certain anxiety and uneasiness interpreting and anticipating a certain mood, a controversial attention to science. But it was nature which attracted her soul. There was a kind of communication with natural elements acquiring a powerful strength. Another important theme is loneliness, seen as a way of being near to her inner self. There is even a lurking sense of mystery pervading her poetic universe. As far as style is concerned, she anticipated symbolist poetry with her evocative language, the metaphorical use of colors, an original way of employing colors, the skillful use of onomatopoeia, compression. That's why she has been called the poet of American sublime, an innovator in her miniaturist art. James Joyce is generally acknowledged as one of the greatest modernist writers. His fame relies on Dubliners, a collection of 15 stories, Ulysses, a portrait of an artist as a young man, and Finnegan's Wake. His themes turn around paralysis, a spiritual one blocking all his characters, and escape, a desire to change, to move, but their impossibility of finding a way out since all characters are too attached to their past, tradition and rituals. All his characters experience loneliness, despair, loss, discomfort, alienation, the weight of responsibility, the dichotomy between life and death. They acquire awareness of their condition through epiphany, a sudden revelation triggered by a banal incident. Anyway, Joyce was an innovator in style for his use of the stream of consciousness technique, The free direct and indirect speech, the elusive musicality of language, the free association of words, and the peculiar use of ambiguity, unobtrusive narrators. Virginia Woolf was one of greatest modernist novelists. Her themes turn around the contrast between the outer world and the inner self, the search for identity, uneasiness, fear of living, the difficulty of growing up. Reality seems too complex to be mastered and lived. All her characters experience a sort of discomfort and acquire awareness thanks to moments of being, special moments able to give a sense to life, a kind of epiphany. She employs the stream of consciousness technique, but she does not go beyond some specific limits. A sort of linguistic decorum is always preserved, a sort of logical organizing principle. The words are evocative, elusive with a poetic association of images. A sort of harmony seems to pervade despite all memories and flashbacks, the lack of a clear chronological development of events. She was an innovator in writing, but not so radical as Joyce. Stability and order seem to dominate her prose. One of the greatest writers of our times, T.S. Eliot, was great at discovering new talents around the world thanks to his cosmopolitan culture ranging in different fields. His themes are marked by the effects the First World War had Western culture. His favorite themes in the first part of his career are loneliness, discomfort, uneasiness, loss, alienation, a sort of frustration. After conversion to Anglicanism, his cultural universe changed and hope gave a new sense to his literary universe. In poetry, he was an innovator with the peculiar use of ambiguity, compression, lack of punctuation, an odd rhyme scheme, mixing up of linguistic registers, a clever use of quotations deriving from different sources. He invented the objective correlative, a set of images reproducing a certain mood, a complex state of mind. He combined archaism with neologisms, various symbols with multiple meanings. George Orwell was great at interpreting a certain mood after 2 world wars and different dictatorships. His success chiefly relies on 1984, his dystopian novel, representing the worst possible society. He aimed at warning against the dangerous effects of totalitarianism, the lack of freedom, the risks deriving from the lack of decency in human relationships, the power enacted by mass media and political propaganda. He gave rise to a reflection upon privacy, slavery, ignorance, social justice and responsibility, trust and torture. He was not an innovator in style, since he seems to follow the great tradition of English novelists, but there are some elements which are worth noticing, such as the use of slogans, oxymora, newspeak, a kind of language with a limited number of words, employed by the party to prevent people from expressing their own feelings. Michael Morpurgo is a great storyteller with an acute perspective of his time. I proposed the reading of For Carlos, A Letter from Your Father, since it was interesting to portray a story set after the Falklands War in single quote 80s, a short conflict which shocked the public opinion since Britain had not been involved in a war for many years. The novelty relies on the fact that the story is told by an English writer from an Argentinian soldier's perspective. The main theme is war as a devastating force striking young lives and families. Media have made us insensitive towards these tragedies, which are seen as video games and not as a personal loss. Other recurring themes are nostalgia, love as a living force, a continuous struggle, parental responsibility, an impending destiny, nature as a silent myth. The short story, as the title seems to suggest, is partly epistolary with an internal narration appearing at the beginning. A melancholic tone seems to emerge with vivid, significant images. Angela Carter was a radical innovator in fairy tale rewriting, reinterpreting them, mixing up different literary genres as the Gothic stories with fairy tales, the use of crucial images, an elusive symbolic language, ambiguity, suspense, and appeal to all senses, her overcoming any form of cliché. Her recurring themes turn around the contrast between the outer world and the inner self, coming to an age and taking responsibilities, a reflection upon new marital patterns, the discovery of sex and gender, search for identity, the difficulty of communication, alienation, discomfort deriving from the impossibility of finding out a place in the world. Carol Ann Duffy is a great contemporary poetic voice. She employs dramatic monologues mixing up different linguistic registers, making a striking association of words, allusion, ambiguity, a bitter humor, and appeal to all senses, use of enjambment to create a more authentic use of language, alliteration even to create an auditory impact. The themes are focused on the contrast between the outer world and the inner self, the search for sense out of a complex reality, fear of facing others, alienation. She intended to represent borderline characters who are unable to fit themselves into any social role, and thus they are left apart. She wanted to portray this sort of uneasiness, discomfort which seems to strike everyone. Boredom seems the most distinctive feature of modern world, a sort of universal deviation and overwhelming sterility. Matilda is a famous novel written by Roald Dahl, a modern fairy tale with an acute use of words, powerful descriptive passages. He is generally acknowledged as the modern Shakespeare due to his inventiveness and originality, the acute sense of humor, the brilliant dialogues. The themes turn around the positive value of reading as a tool to explore and interpret reality, a reflection upon education as a springboard to a successful life, the importance of great teachers to give rise to self-esteem and realization. Other relevant themes are the contrast between the world of adults and that of children, the search for sense and identity, the strategic role of parents and their responsibilities, a strong criticism against family as a social institution.